Hello, welcome to Domestika Live. I'm Micaela Marini, and I'm part of the Domestika team. Domestika Live are live creative chats where we bring the best professionals and creatives to speak with our community. During our In Conversation with Live, we get to interview some of the biggest names in that community. This is a really great opportunity to get to know them more in depth and also to ask them any questions that you might have. Domestika is the world's largest creative community. We have online courses in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, all taught by top professionals. In addition, in our online forum, thousands of professionals from different creative backgrounds can interact and share their work and experience. All our lives are streamed on Facebook and YouTube, and they offer viewers a chance to learn something new, as well as develop professionally, thanks to the advice and shared experience of top professionals. For today's In Conversation With, we are so lucky to be speaking with Italian award-winning illustrator Carlo Stanga. He is known for his distinctive architectural illustrations, has published multiple books with Moleskine, and his clients include UNESCO, Condé Nast, and the Wall Street Journal. If you have any questions for Carlo, please leave them in the comments, and we'll be answering them during the live. Hi, Carlo. He's about to join us.
Hello, Michaela. Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. I feel so lucky, really, to have the possibility to speak with Domestika public.
Well, we're so happy that you could be with us, and we're so excited to learn some more from you. So to start off with, I really love your illustrations, and something that I really enjoy is I feel like you bring a lot of color and whimsy to architectural illustration, which is kind of unexpected. And so I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about your creative and personal journey. How did you become an architectural illustrator and begin to develop that style?
Well, I began very, very early when I was a child. I remember that, in everyone's life, it's very important to meet the right people, the right persons. And I was very lucky at the elementary school to have a very weird, special teacher. I would say very unconventional. She was a very tall woman with crazy hair and with a very deep voice like this. It was kind of a witch for us children. But and sometimes she was able also, when she was very angry, to take us from the hair and tear up from the floor. It was really a little bit a borderline kind of person. But she was very clever. She has a very artistic personality. And so she tried to push our talent to improve our skills. For example, in my case, I was loving drawing so much. I was always drawing. So when I was in my classroom, I was allowed to stay down on the floor on my belly and make very large drawing on very large sheets of paper. And so I was drawing with a felt tip pen, black felt tip pen, very big illustrations about the issues the subject teacher was speaking about, like French Revolution or Roman Empire or whatever. And my friends at the end of my work came to color of the illustration. So we had a lot of fun. After this period, I had later, when I was graduated in architecture after my degree in architecture at the Polytechnic of Milan, I met Bruno Munari. It was another very important encounter in my life. Yes, also in this case, this unconventional way to see things, to see life, to see art, knew an improvement because it was able really to teach how to use fantasy, how to see things in a different way. Because, in our lives, at a certain point, especially for the people who are drawing, always arrives someone who say, okay, stop making these doodles and begin to study the very important things like
To be
literature,
serious.
mathematics, history, and so on. That is, of course, very important. But for people who are loving drawing, they feel a little bit useless and silly or something like that. And if you find people who really can help you, it's a big luck.
That's great.
So,
And so then how did you go from that to architectural illustration, from drawing kind of everything
well,
from history on
uh,
your classroom floor?
if you see, there is some imaging about my elementary illustrations. I was already very connected between, very interested about
Mhm.
architecture. Like this, I made this drawing when I was 10,
Oh,
and
wow.
you can see that architecture is already the protagonist of my work,
And they're
with
so
lots of
detailed.
details. Yeah, and so I don't know, maybe I had already this interest about
Mhm.
architecture since the beginning. I was living in this small village in the north of Italy, not far from Milan,
Yeah.
that is full of beautiful architecture, walls, big castles, and all this. So I was somehow already influenced by the presence of this architecture.
Mhm.
Later, when I was 8, I visited for the first time Rome, and I was really crazy about the city. And when I entered the Pantheon, I remember with this big gathering to the sky that you can see
Yeah.
in the center of the dome. It has been so impressive for me that I decided to be an architect once I would have been adult. And so, yes, it was something very natural for me, and I was
Mhm.
able quite early to recognize these two interests, these two
Yeah.
passions, drawing and architecture. Actually, these two things are not that strange because architects normally draw. Uh, People say architects build, but architects, since always they are drawing, some other
Mhm.
people build. Architects are
Yeah.
drawing. So, yes, it was quite natural in this case.
Great. Yeah, and so it sounds like kind of you found your creative passions quite early and you were able to pursue them, which is amazing. Um, and were you able to be as creative in architecture as you are in your illustrations, or was it more difficult to kind of bring that different perspective of the world to architecture?
Well, yes, I decided to. Architecture is, of course, our environment. So
Hmm.
to see the world through architecture is quite, for me, natural. And it is a talent that began very early when I was only, let's say, 2.
Hmm.
I remember that when I was drawing everywhere, or all
Yeah.
the available surfaces on the doors of my apartment, on the floors, on the walls. My parents were
Your
crazy.
parents must have loved it.
Yeah. Of course, I used all the tools that I was able to find in the apartment. So also markers, for example, that are very
Mm.
difficult to erase. And but when I was 2 in this period, I was unable to speak. So my parents
Okay.
led me to the doctor, and the doctor said, "No worries, he will speak." Actually, I'm speaking today, but but he is trying to communicate through drawing. And actually,
Oh.
drawing is a very important, very direct way to
Hmm.
communicate beyond words. And so, yes, I mean, communication was always very important. It's very central in our experience. It's really crucial for a human being. And I would like to remember something that is really history, is not an anecdote, but it's a very famous experiment. Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, about 800 years ago,
Hmm.
Frederick II, made in Sicily because he wanted to find out the natural, the original language, and
Yeah.
the language that God gave to Adam, let's say.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so he decided to make really a weird and a cruel experiment, because it took a number of infants, of children. He gave these children to nurses, and he forbade nurses to communicate with these children. He wanted to see
Wow.
a natural language coming out from these children. So it was completely forbidden to interact with them
Wow.
using even using hand gesture. Teaching languages, it was all forbidden. And this experiment ended with the death of the children,
Oh,
because it was
wow.
incredible. Because really, for us as human beings, communication is basic, because through communication you can share your feelings, and these children were growing up without feelings, without love, without communication of love, the main most
Yeah.
positive emotions. So in particular, drawing is a very direct way of communication. If you are thinking, for example, of Lascaux caves or
Oh, yeah.
Altamira. We have maybe some images also about this, but everybody knows this very famous bisons, or very like this, for example. Uh, since the beginning, prehistoric man used to paint these incredible masterpieces to communicate something mainly to gods. And they were speaking also between them. They were sharing the same emotion, because drawing is all about emotions. They call this recently these incredible masterpieces like the Sistine Chapel of the prehistoric times, because they were really incredible um, works. And it's also very interesting, and it was a mystery, a very deep mystery for a long time. The question why this prehistoric man, with all the problems they had, like for example, they were prey, more than predators, of course.
Yeah, why they took the
Yeah,
time.
yeah, most of the time. And they were creating these masterpieces in very deep caves, like 200
Mhm.
meters inside the earth, in the
So they weren't
darkness.
spaces they lived in?
Hmm?
They weren't spaces they lived in. They had special spaces that they were
Yeah,
decorating. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
of course. And
Yeah.
they were using, of course, fire to do it, but it was really an extreme experiment. Also, this very
Yeah.
difficult. And then Maria Gimbutas, a scholar, an American scholar, about 20 years ago, after a long study, a long
Mhm.
research, discovered that these prehistoric men were believing that Earth itself was a goddess, a big goddess, not a symbol of goddess, but really a goddess. And
Yeah.
these caves were like the uterus of the goddess, the womb of the goddess. So because they have this particular shape, they are dark, they are humid. So the idea was to create these images, and the
Mhm.
day after to find the same animals in the prairie or the savannah. So
Ah.
it was a magical kind of relationship with drawing that we
Yeah.
can find nowadays also in the children. When children are drawing, they have a
Mhm.
kind of magical approach. They want to show what they are feeling and what they are figuring out in their minds.
Yeah.
And so
So
everything is really unreal, like I don't know, something that is very important, like the mother, for example, or the father are very big, are like giant in these drawings. So it's a kind of magical approach also in the childhood of
yeah,
us.
so do you think then that like drawing can help us kind of communicate things that other forms of communication or other formats might not let us share with other people? Like it kind of has this magical ability to communicate different ideas?
Yes, I think there is also always this kind of character, and
Yeah.
communication and sharing these feelings are so important. Nowadays, we see how successful, for example, are social networks, where we are posting images, drawings,
Yeah.
photos, and we need to share it, to share with everyone, and possibly to have also a feedback. So this is very crucial for a human being. And yes, I think that it's really. I remember an episode when Goethe arrived for his travel to Italy. After he passed the border, he was looking at a beautiful view on a lake in Italy, but he was alone, and he wrote how what I was really unlucky. It was not possible to share with another, with a friend, with my wife, with someone, this beautiful view, that it will be lost. I cannot share it. So creating images and sharing, it's really
preserving the beauty.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's great. Well, we have a viewer question. So Aura Moreno says, hello, Carlo.
Hi.
I would like to know what's the process of including such a large amount of different objects into your drawings without losing the perspective of the main architectural elements? So do you do the main elements first and then fill it in, or how do you put all those together?
It's for me, it's something very natural. I must say that basically I consider everything like a very rich object. The word is rich in itself. And so if you decide to look at an architecture, for example, and at the same time you consider the outline of the architecture, the main outline, the silhouette of the architecture, and then you can begin to focus more on every single detail of this architecture. Imagine, for example, of a Gaudi architecture. It's so full of details, but at the same time, this architecture has a very recognizable shape in general. So you have to keep always in mind these two different things. First of all, there is this general recognizable shape, and then you can fill these shapes with all the details. So it's possible to do it if you have in mind these two things and how they are combined together in harmony. The most important thing is probably to recognize the harmony in this very complicated architecture, because if there are good quality architecture, the harmony is really always present there.
Yeah. And is that you, when you're looking at architecture, do you self-edit some of it? Do you kind of pick what details will go in to be harmonious? Or is it that you pick to illustrate locations that are already kind of harmoniously laid out?
Well, you mean when I illustrate architecture, if I find sometimes some detail that is not so harmonious with all the rest, or I try to adjust it to make it more, well, it's more a problem of movement, because we are moving where we are in the street, in the middle of the city. So sometimes it is possible to look at the architecture on the right side, like when you find the right profile in the portrait of a person.
Yeah, kind of your good side and bad side.
Yeah, yes. But sometimes if you exaggerate a detail, it can be really interesting, because it's completely uncommon. And sometimes it's very interesting to see, to find out something that is completely uncommon. If you exaggerate just the detail of the architecture, of a particular building, it is very clear that it's impossible that is like that. It is only your decision to do, to focus more on this detail and to exaggerate, to enhance this detail. So it can be also funny sometimes.
Yeah, so it's kind of, you can kind of create your own style by choosing what to exaggerate and play up.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads me, because we've spoken briefly before about your creative diamond, and I was curious if you could explain what that is, and also does kind of everybody have that same creative passion? Do you,
The diamond is very important.
yeah.
For me, it's very important that now that I have this course in Domestika, I tell the students, please consider that, of course, I want to show my method in the course. I want to
Hmm.
show how to draw, architectural illustration, all this. But I will be very happy if at the end of this course, you are really able to focus on your diamond, to recognize your diamond. And I
And
think,
what is
yes, the diamond, yes, of course, I consider for granted, but the diamond is how ancient Greeks call this little spirit living inside of you,
that? Hmm.
a kind of little god that
Yeah.
later in the Christian religion, for example, is the angel that is leading you. But in the ancient times, it was like your talent,
Hmm.
your main passion, the reason why you are on earth, and the
Hmm.
thing that you can do better just because you love it.
Yeah.
So, for example, for an artist, is art, is drawing, is painting. As for, I don't know, a designer is designing object. For an administrator is to administrate well something,
Yeah.
or for someone who is working in the bank is to have to be able to solve with creativity
Hmm.
problems. So it is not only regarding art, but I think everybody has a diamond because you can have different kind of skills. So
Yeah.
you always need this particular kind of intelligence and
Hmm.
creativity to
Yeah.
see things in a different kind of way and to connect different far things that actually to be able to recognize these connections between things.
Yeah. And for people who are kind of working on trying to recognize or nurture their diamond, what can they do? Like, how can you help it grow or help make its voice
This
louder?
is you must be able to feel your soul, your real
Hmm.
passion, and sometimes it's very difficult because it's something that for us is really normal and doesn't seem to be so important. Maybe I don't know, a girl like very much to calm friends or something like this, and then she will discover later to have a special talent for to be a fashion stylist or something like that.
Hmm.
I mean, I made a very silly example,
But
but
I mean,
uh,
just like exploring or kind of experimenting with what you like and seeing what sticks.
I think that it's very important in this case when you have this feeling
Hmm.
to try to see yourself from outside, like if you were another person, different from yourself. Try to see yourself like when we watch our pictures, and sometimes we are not able to recognize ourselves so well in the picture.
Yeah.
And if you are able to make this kind of meditation exercise, try to think what did I do today, for example.
Hmm.
What was my day today? Where I was really happy,
Yeah.
when I felt this particular pleasure by doing
Hmm.
something. And maybe, of course, the idea about yourself is coming also from the other people, your friends, parents. People can say, "Oh, but did you realize that you are very good in this kind of field, in these things?" And so you should put together all these suggestions and
Hmm.
try to understand better yourself. It's not so easy, and sometimes it is something that you do even every day. It seems to be so common, so normal, and you don't recognize it like as your real diamond.
Yeah, I mean, that also makes me think about like when people develop their own kind of creative style, like an illustrator developing their own style or a designer developing your style. You don't really notice it overnight. And then 5 years later, you're like, oh, I really like bright colors. And
Yeah,
and you realize like that's
just
what
like
makes you
that.
happy.
Yes,
So it
yes,
kind of
yes.
sounds similar to that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you also have to look at other people who are doing
Uh-huh.
something and maybe you are very interested about these people, and you don't know why at the beginning, but just because they are doing just the thing you like, your passion, and these are the influences that you can have,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the creative person like artists. We always had a lot of influences that were very important in our life. For example, when I was drawing as a child, these very complicated illustration drawings that I just seen before, I was influenced by artists or illustrator during that period. So it's always something that is coming from this feeling that makes you recognize this very deep um, skills that you have, this passion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yes, it's something very uh, complicated. It's a mix of different feelings and experiences. Maybe you, I don't know, for a chance, today is very easy to see on the screen in Google Image, for example, to scroll and to find some image that is really hits you in a very strong way. And I must say that most of the times today, students or people are interested about images. Sometimes they put this very interesting images in a folder. They make a collection of images, but they don't go because we have millions of images, and they don't deepen the meaning of the image. They don't try to find out who is behind this image. If they just do it, if they try to deepen all this image they love, uh, they would find an incredible world. This world would be really like a mine of discovery for them. So I always suggest people also to push their diamond, to find out better their passion, to deepen what other people before them made in
Mm-hmm.
the past. So it's very important also always to study, to try to understand the other images, and don't stop only on the surface. Don't be so shallow, and try to really to discover, to carve out all the layers up, and then go into the deep.
Yeah, to understand what's really like attracting you to the image in the first place,
Yeah,
to kind of untangle it.
yeah.
And that kind of connects to a question that we have for a viewer from a viewer. So you were talking about how nowadays we can access lots of reference images, and there's lots of great new ways to kind of make art and gain inspiration. And so one person asked, "What's your opinion about drawing on an iPad or using other drawing tablets to illustrate?"
Oh, they are wonderful means. I like very much to make a mix between analog world and digital world, and I always begin from, for example, for a drawing on paper, and then I scan it, and then I put it inside a digital program like Photoshop, for example, and
Mm-hmm.
I mix these different tools. So iPad or a computer or all these digital tools are amazing, and of course, they can develop your creativity. You always have to think. Many people are skeptics, for example, about this untraditional new um, items, new tools. But you have
Mm-hmm.
to consider that always in history,
Yeah.
many people were always frightened by new things. Like, for example, when they began to write on paper instead
Yeah.
of clay tablets, it was probably, they had probably a lot of doubts. Oh, paper doesn't last for a long time, and clay tablet, yes, on all these things. And so every time there are a lot of doubts about this. But I'm sure that I'm very enthusiastic about
Mm-hmm.
uh, new inventions. And
Yeah.
for example, I work on a Wacom tablet to color my illustrations, and I work using layers. You
Mm-hmm.
can, if you make a mistake, you can go back. If you don't have to throw away whole work. And so I think there are a lot of possibilities. And
Yeah.
what is very important, in my opinion, is always to know also the traditional way of work, the analog way of working, because all these new items are based on the same intuitive way you use in the analog world. So if you are already very good in the analog world, you will be ready for the digital world in any case.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's
so
excellent.
I'm very
And we have a few more viewer questions. So,
yeah.
Amrita, I hope I said that right. Hi.
Yeah.
She wanted to ask, or they wanted to ask, do you have any objects or elements that you tend to avoid naturally while drawing? Or what kind of objects do you perhaps find challenging to illustrate? Is there something that you don't particularly like to draw?
Something that she means something that is I try to avoid to
Yeah.
draw, or because I don't like it, or
Maybe you hate, maybe pigeons are just really hard to draw, and you're like, I cannot draw any pigeons in this square.
pigeons. No, I like to draw pigeons. I don't like very much pigeons because we have too many pigeons in Italy, maybe in Venice,
Yeah.
or anything. They are like in the Alfred Hitchcock film.
Oh, the birds.
Yeah, the birds. And so I don't know. I'm always very curious about drawing. Maybe I don't like very much drawing modern cars because I think that nowadays cars are not very interesting. Are not very beautiful. Are more beautiful cars in the 70s, in the 60s, the ancient cars or things like this. I'm not very interested about that. I find them really anonymous somehow. I prefer bicycles. I prefer other means of transportation, but maybe cars. I never thought of it. I love drawing, for example, other items like drones that are so present now in our lives and are so funny because I was always drawing as a child helicopters, a lot of helicopters with witches driving helicopters, but maybe these witches they were like my teacher, I don't know. And
The one who told you.
exactly. And so, well, it was better to fly with a drone than with my teacher cheering you from there. But yes, I think cars, actually. I don't love cars. So I was probably not a good car designer.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And a few other questions from viewers.
Yeah.
So one of them is Simone, who says, every time I start an illustration, I hope to achieve the same kind of enchantment that we see in your work. But I often end up creating something I'm used to. So what could tempt you to try a fresh new style? I think it's kind of asking, how can you kind of work on creating something unexpected or something fresh in your work? What advice would you give to someone?
This is very difficult because it's always important to focus on your influences first, because this happened in the whole history of art. Everyone had a maestro before, a teacher, and then it was able to develop his own style, beginning from this learning before. And then I think that is very important to try to find your main characteristics in your style. When you draw, you can make a test to focus on the different drawings you did and to find out some characteristic, some feature that continuously appears in all your drawings.
Yeah.
Can be 1 million different things. I don't know, but maybe you can find some kind of line, some kind of color, some kind of perspective, vision, and then you can begin to uh, make an analysis about it and write down, these are my main features. And they are actually fresh. This is all just the final analysis. But they are fresh things because they are very natural for you as an artist. And so if you begin to recognize them, you can also try to improve them and keep them, recognize them as really the pillars of your style. So this is a first way to uh, to approach your style and to consider your style like something very outstanding. And when people see, for example, your drawing, they say, "Ha, this is Simone. Is
Yes.
Simone's drawing?" So I think it's very important to stop a little bit, to collect
Mhm.
your drawings, and to make this analysis, and then to draw without stopping. Sometimes maybe if you have this feeling to draw, you have the inspiration, you can also tell your friends or your girlfriend, okay, tonight I need to draw because I don't want to lose this, and you will go outside to the disco to eat pizza another time. I mean, try to push your diamond and your passion, and not to avoid it too much. So I
Yeah. So
think, but if Simone asks about styles, it's just a first very good step, because it means that he's very committed about this, and he is very interested to develop a style. So it's for sure the first right step.
perfect. Yeah. And yeah, so illustrators have to spend quite a bit of time practicing, developing your style, working on it a lot. And so Amrita asks, can you describe your typical work week? What does that look like for you as a professional illustrator?
Can you describe?
Your work week. So what does your week
Ah,
look
yeah,
like
my
while
work
you're
week. My work week. Well, I normally I cannot draw in the morning.
Mhm.
I wake up. I try to. I have a big breakfast, and then I come to the studio and I begin to reply to the emails, and I try to plan also the day. Then it comes the time, the lunchtime. I go
Mhm.
to have lunch outside with friends or something, and then after it, I begin to draw, and I never stop drawing. It's something that, of course, I try to give, and I try to do what I really like doing. If there is something that I don't want to do and I don't have the right inspiration at the moment, I try to do it later when I will find the inspiration. So every day is more or less the same. So my week is like this. I can, if I have a big inspiration, I can go on in the night until 3, because it's very nice for me drawing during the night, because they never bother you with telephone calls or other
Yeah,
things. You can go on in the silent night, and draw as I do.
great.
And I found a lot of inspiration during
Yeah.
the
And do you ever have a time where maybe it's really hard to find inspiration, or you kind of like finding a lot of projects
yes.
that you just don't really can't
Yes,
move
yes.
forward on?
It's very, yeah, it's very strange, because you know this fear of the blank page
Yeah.
that is very typical of many artists, and especially also for writers. This is very typical, and it happens sometimes also to me. And what you need to do in this case, in my case, for example, is to make a stroke, to make a line with a pencil, to begin to attack the sheet of paper, and not to be intimidated by it,
Mhm.
but try to consider this blank page like the last of many layers, where there are all the other drawings you made before in your life. So this is
Okay.
just the last page,
Mhm.
and you have to feel that this page is based on a very long experience. So it should be good at the end. You don't have to be frightened by it. But it's
Yeah.
something that happens. I remember I can tell about this famous Emilio Vedova, this Italian painter who was professor the Academy of Art in Venice, and he had sometimes to face this problem with students because students sometimes in front of the white canvas was not able to begin, and so he went there with a big brush and he made a very energetic stroke on the canvas, and so it was like a shock for the student who began to draw after this. And there are many different methods. This is very violent somehow, but it was working. And so, yeah, sometimes you can have a lack of inspiration, but it can happen, for example, to go out for a walk because walking is making you think in another way. You see other things. You are not closed in your studio. So there are many, many ways, but it's very normal that you have a lack of inspiration. It's not something strange or weird or rare.
Excellent. Yeah, we all suffer from it.
Yeah.
Omar also asks you, how do you dominate the perspective and vanishing point? If you
Oh, this is very interesting because you know that sometimes it's very important to break rules, and you
I
don't
think
have.
there's some pictures. Yeah.
Yeah, because the vanishing point is one of the typical rules that seems to be really natural, but they are not natural at all. The vanishing point, if you think well, is something that has been invented during the Italian Renaissance, and it was not existing before. And it's just it means that you have to concentrate in one point, very far away, and you connect all the lines of the drawing with this point. But and all we all think, people think that it is a real way as we see the reality, but it's absolutely not like that because we are not being with an eye in the middle of our face like a camera. We don't have one vanishing point here. We have 2 points, and we are also not standing in the space, but we are moving. So
Yeah.
we see the reality in a very complicated thing. So the vanishing point is just a convention. It's just a rule to dominate somehow, to masterize the reality. And it's like to be in a box or to have a window. You open this window and you have a frame around. All the Western paintings are based on this idea, the window. And during the history of art, later, artists, uh, had problems with this vanishing point. So because it was like a jail somehow, like a prison, and so Picasso, for example, was able to find many vanishing points, many different points, or surrounding points. So I think to consider the vanishing point perspective is, of course, a very interesting, a useful tool. Is not difficult because as you can go to attend to a Domestika course, for example, and of course there are a lot of professors who are speaking about the vanishing point. It is something, of course, very important. You have to only to learn it and you do it. It's not. I don't see it very complicated. What is very funny is to go beyond the vanishing point and try to show things in a different way and try to break this rule. And I don't know, for example, maybe there is an image of a Chinese print where you can see that in this case, in the Chinese culture, not in Western culture, exactly this one, you can see that in this case, there is no vanishing point, but it is a beautiful drawing. All the people are more or less have more or less the same size, and also the buildings are like are seen like in a collage seen in different moments. So it's a problem of time. This city is lived in different moments, like by a painter who is walking through the city, and he shows different side of the city in different moments during a long time. So you don't need a vanishing point. Consider that most probably the vanishing point in the Renaissance, so there's a geometric study of point, was one of the reasons why it was the weapons, fire weapons, were developed so well during the Renaissance because it was possible to hit a point by considering all these lines. So when you have a certain kind of vision like this vanishing point perspective, is a vision that make you see the reality in this particular way, not only in the pictures and the paintings, but in the whole culture where you are living. So it's very important also how to masterize this kind of rules. And if you are able to uh, approach other kind of rules, you can see the reality with a different kind of vision. And this is, of course, an enrichment, and it's always very, very important for everyone.
Yeah, that's really great. Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that I enjoy about your work. You have perspective, but it's not a perfect geometric
No,
line. There's more
no,
interest, more depth.
yeah,
Yeah, it just kind of adds a personality
yeah,
versus just
exactly,
looking at a photograph might.
yeah. As I
Yeah.
say, you are moving, you are looking there, and so you are
Yeah.
not like this, like a statue in front of a vanishing point. So
Yeah. Great. And so we've talked a little bit about passion, so I kind of want to go back to that. Sometimes, like you, it seemed like you kind of always knew your passion. You were quite set in it, and you recognized it early. But I feel like sometimes it's hard to recognize your passion, or you might not feel like you're allowed to pursue it if you want to, for instance, be creative, and people kind of push you towards a different sort of career. And I wanted to know if you've kind of ever faced one of those challenges and if you would have any advice for people who are in a similar situation.
yeah, it happened to me, and it was very hard because when I graduated in architecture, I was sure to follow this professional kind of
Mm-hmm.
path. And I created my studio. I was very lucky because I had many clients. I made buildings and other things. But then by the practice, I realized that it was really not my main passion. I prefer to draw architecture, to have
Mm-hmm.
architecture as a protagonist in my drawing in illustrations, but not attending things like I don't know, bureaucratic
Yeah.
stuff, or uh, attending the construction site with a lot of problems that took a lot of time from the possibility of creating drawings. So I calculated that 80% of my time it was dedicated to construction site or
Oh.
bureaucratic stuff in Italy. It was incredible. And then I had only the 20% of my time for drawing. And
Mm-hmm.
it was really exhausting for me. I decided to go to a psychotherapist. It was really, I was in a big crisis because I was not able to go on like that. And at the
Wow.
end, like a flash, I decided to merge together illustration and architecture just because in the meantime I was always working as an illustrator in a
Mm-hmm.
parallel way with architecture. And my work as an illustration began to be quite successful at the beginning. And so I decided to do that, to to be only an illustrator, but to make architecture, passion for architecture, live inside illustrations. So I was
Mm-hmm.
able to find out. But yes, it was a very big crisis. And when you
Yeah.
have this crisis, you have always to think that, okay, I have to do something. I have to solve this problem in the best way.
Great. So basically, advice would be kind of if you kind of feel uncomfortable or you're not being able to spend the time towards your passion, kind of taking a step back to look at it and see how you can try and incorporate it in your life, which connects kind of to a viewer question that we have, which was when you started out, how did you begin to sell your work?
When I start out, well, I have everything in my mind immediately. Where something is really interesting, in general, I figure out everything in my mind. So I already have this image on this sheet of paper.
Mm-hmm.
I try to, and in general, I begin for a corner and then I go on. But with my imagination, I see the whole drawing on the sheet of paper.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I make some line, more or less with a vanishing point perspective, as you know, not perfectly, maybe. And then or quite good, but I try to change it. And it is this grid where I'm drawing everything. But in general, I start from a corner on the right of the sheet of paper and I go on and I fill it completely.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's,
And
yeah.
how did you begin to sell your work? When did you first kind of start making money from being an illustrator?
Well, I began. Well, I would say that I always, very early, I realized that people were very happy to pay me for my passion. It was a very big
Very
discovery. I said,
lucky.
okay, this is very nice. So I was working when I was 18. I was working in an advertising agency,
Hmm.
making sketches, making preparation sketches for drawing, and so I began to earn money there. And then I decided to study architecture, and so I began to be an architecture, and I had that crisis. But meanwhile, I always had the possibility to be paid for my drawings. Because I was always drawing, even though I had always the 10% of the time or 20% of the time, I was always somehow drawing. In my opinion, it is always very important to do what you like and to share with
Hmm.
the people
Yeah.
what you do, because with more people know what you do, with more you have the possibility to attract the attention of the right person, of the right clients, the possible clients. So it's
Yeah.
very important also always to be to show your thing, because I know many students feel very unsafe. Many people feel very unsafe about what they do. Keep everything in the drawer, but it's very important to make a choice of the best things. You have to forget the bad things, of course, because just one drawing can destroy your beautiful portfolio. It can be
Hmm.
a bad thing for your portfolio. But it's very important when you begin to see that friends of people around or teachers begin to
Hmm.
say, "Oh, this is nice." You have to begin to collect this to create your portfolio and to show it to the other people.
Yeah. And that connects perfectly to a question that Omar had. He says, "Greetings from Mexico."
Yeah.
And he was asking how you promote your work, which kind of ties into what you just spoke about. But like, what platforms can people use? Should they try and to approach galleries or just put things on Instagram, try and show people that they're making art? How would you suggest they approach it?
Well, I have representative, I have
Mhm.
agents, illustration agents, but I must say that Instagram is really a very good way to promote your work, because many people can, of course there is a lot of concurrence because there are million images in Instagram, but if you are able to find your let's say fresh style, recognizable style, as we said before, these images for sure will come out better compared to the other, and
Yeah.
especially they are really unique. You can show that. I think that you are very lucky today as young guys, because you can use social networks a lot, and so they are a very good way to promote your work.
Great. Um, and I also have another question from Danny, who
Yeah.
says, "Hello,
Hi,
and
Danny.
To what extent do you consider color to create depths in your images?
Uh, hmm, to consider, well, for me, to consider to give depth to your image
Mm-hmm.
means apart, of course, the perspective, because we spoke a lot about the perspective. We speak anymore about it. For example, shadows. In my also when I was a child, I was making very long shadow, like the sunset shadows when the sun is very low on the horizon, and so I think that using in the best way light, and so light and shadows is a way to give a very interesting depth to your images, to your illustration. So I will use a lot if you like, if it's a part of your style, because if you are not interested in shadows, you don't have to do it. You have to do also to use always things that you love and that your diamond loves. But for me, it's more shadows than colors. And about colors, speaking about colors, is for me, for example, is always very important not to use too many colors because we are not living in a carnival. I mean, if you go outside, for example, or you have a look to your apartment, you see there are not a big amount of colors. In general, there is a limited palette, a colors palette. And you have to choose these colors that will be part of your style, the colors you feel more, because you have to think also that colors are feelings. When you are doing, we say, for example, you can say in English, I am blue, instead of saying I am
Yeah.
sad, or red is color of love, yellow. There are many different, yeah, it depends on your taste, but I mean, in general, psychologically speaking, colors are reflecting emotions and feelings. And all the black and white or the black outline of the drawing has to do with the structure, the rational part. So colors are cannot be so many because it means that you are probably crazy with all these feelings. Well, you have a kind, some kind of range of feelings. You are in a kind of balance, so in a healthy balance. So you don't have all this amount of feelings around you, but you have only your the feelings you are feeling, the emotions you are feeling in that particular moment that you want to communicate. Now, for example, we are happy, we are excited, enthusiastic. I hope we are not depressed or sad, and also jealous, and also, I mean, we have a range of things that is limited every moment. If you have all these colors together, there is something wrong.
And we have one last question before we sign off from
Yeah.
Simon. And it's, how do you decide where to cast the shadow? So just kind of giving advice about kind of when you're considering the size, the direction of the shadow, and kind of what does it add to the story?
Well, the shadows are connected with the place that you are depicting. If you decide, for example, since I am illustrating mainly cities and architecture, of course, I try to go to this place in different time during the day to see which is the right orientation and what kind of shadows you can have in that particular area. For example, in Domestika course, I went in Mexico City to make a project to illustrate a church in Mexico City, a church that it was sinking in the ground. It's crazy because there's the bed, the lake bed, the lake existing before the foundation of the colonial Mexico City by the Spanish people, is moving very much, is going into the ground. So this church now is 3 meters under the other streets level in Mexico City.
So it must kind of create a bit of a dramatic shadow, I imagine, like a very distinctive.
Yeah, so also the shadows are changing because all the other buildings are upper than in the past compared to the past. And so you really have to go there. Then, of course, you can also change something because you are an artist, you are not a photographer. So you can also a photographer can change, of course, shadows. And he's an artist too, of course. But I mean, you can also change something. You can exaggerate also this, not only perspectives or details. You can also follow your feelings about this place and to enhance for example, the darkness of these shadows, of these blue or green shadows. Remember, the shadows are never gray; they tend to be more blue. And it's enough to go to snowy landscape, and you will see that all the shadows are on the white are blue. And so, yes, you have to consider the reality. And then if you want to make this image very dramatic, you can enhance the size, the darkness of these shadows. So if you start from the reality, is better, because the reality is full of suggestions, of course. And you, after all, you are depicting the city, and this kind of orientation, these shadows have to do a lot with the identity of this particular part of the city.
The unique atmosphere of that place as well. It sounds like it really captures that kind of color as you were talking about before.
Absolutely. And every city has its particular light, of course. For example, in Madrid is very famous the blue of the sky, the deep blue of the sky. And in other cities, it's different, because if you go to the Northern Europe, it's completely different. And so you have to consider very much this kind of the light, because the light changes, of course, the colors of the city. And so it's very important, this.
Oh, excellent. Thank you so much again, Carlo, for spending time with us and allowing us to interview you. And thank you to everyone who tuned in and who asked questions.
Thank you to everyone.
Really, really appreciate it.
Very happy.
Yeah, thank you.
La idea es como algo muy frágil.
Se me fue la hebra.
I'm going to show you some examples. This is what we've got behind me.
¿Qué más preguntas tengo por aquí? ¿Cómo descubriste que los